My name's Lois Bower-Bjornson, and I am the Southwestern Pennsylvania Field Organizer with Clean Air Council. I host something called Frackland Tours. Frackland Tours were developed to give people a first-hand account of what it's like to live and grow up in the shale fields of southwestern PA. I live in Washington County, Pennsylvania, the most heavily fracked county in Pennsylvania. We're about 40 minutes south of Pittsburgh, in a beautiful, beautiful part of Pennsylvania called Scenery Hill. I would really say, investigating and experimenting when we first moved back to this area. My third son will be 17. We've been here 19 years, so he was about 2 at the onset of, fracking coming into town. And at the beginning of this, no one really knows what's happening except that there's a bunch of people just really, I call them like ants descending upon you that you don't know. And they're knocking at your door and they're telling you that, hey, you can make a lot of money, or hey, will you sign with us, and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And, initially at the onset, you talk to folks, and, I remember a good friend of mine, actually a client, said, oh, our first check was $65,000. And she's like, there's nothing on my property. And I was like, well, that's really a no-brainer, because at the time, I was pregnant with my daughter. And then, the next couple months I had her. So, we just had 3 children with my daughter on the way, or 3 boys with my daughter on the way. And so, and we actually met with some young boys at one of the local offices, that they rented here, to discuss this with them. And long and short of it, there was a commonality that my husband shared with these young boys. They were musicians and knew someone, and he was a musician. So it was just this weird sort of connection. So we felt sort of not necessarily protected, but at least that they would be upfront and honest with you, because people in southwestern Pennsylvania are upfront and honest. And so when you take people's word from out of town, you take people's word. I mean, it's just something that is really prone to this area, that people take people by their word. If you say something, that's what you mean. So when people were telling us these things were going to happen and there was going to be no impact to us, and it's like dish soap or laundry soap, and you can brush your teeth with it, the fracking fluid, you kind of were like, really? But okay. Like, you're a little leery, but you expect people to be honest with you. Plus, this was a whole industry that was coming up that had done this stuff in other states. And again, this is the extraction side of the state. So, we had oil, coal, steel. So I grew up in a coal town. We're very used to extraction. So this was just another extraction. But it really questioned a lot. So we met with these young boys. And on the heels of fracking, I was involved with another organization called Stop the Towers, where we helped stop 5,000 power lines being traipsed across southwestern Pennsylvania. 2 would have been on my property. And they don't know what they even do to the human body. So, we didn't want my children under that. So that was where I'd say, like, I got my feet wet and was sort of, I was of the naive assumption that, well, if all these people don't want this, well, then it can't happen, right? Well, that's just not true, because I found how powerful, like, public utilities were, and, and they didn't give a crap if no one in the whole entire area wanted it. They were going to put it through. And it was really to power places like New Jersey and New York, because they don't have coal-fired power plants like we do. So we were going to become more polluted to give them power, but it was cheaper for them. So this was the deal that worked out. So that's where I learned about meeting with legislators, attorneys, and just that sort of thing. And we were fortunate enough to stop that miraculously. So long and short of it, I had said to these gentlemen that we met with that, hey, I don't want anything like that near my kids or anything. And so it was, I would say, maybe 3 days later, and I get a call from one of these young boys that, worked for one of these oil and gas companies. He said, if you think the towers were bad, this is worse. And he said, I'm going to tell you how to keep it off of your property. And he said, first of all, you don't have enough land. He said, but don't let them go under your property, anywhere near your property. Don't let them put anything on your property, so on and so forth. So, which I found really refreshing, and, thought, okay. And then he said, I want you to look something up. He said, I want you to look up Martha Goodspell fracking. And that was the time when our kids were little. So, like, on Saturdays, if my husband was home, we took them to the libraries and, did chess club, whatever. So we were doing that one Saturday. My daughter was born at this point, and I looked this up on the computer, and I was really horrified, because I taught about this woman's story and what she went through in her area. And I was like, yeah, this is really awful, I think. I don't think this is a really good thing. So I sort of had this gnawing gut feeling from the beginning of, like, this just really isn't settling with me. And, you can call it hocus pocus or whatever, but I was like, this is not good. So that's really where it all sort of started. And then The Towers organization started out with 6 people. This was the organization to stop the 5,000 power kilovolt power lines being traipsed across. And then it grew to hundreds. So one day, and my daughter was like in my arms still, and we were at a local place, the Spring House actually, having ice cream. And this gentleman comes up, and we're sitting outside and we're talking, and we start to talk about what we're seeing as far as fracking goes, trucks and flaring and, just kind of like, again, like this ants just descending everywhere and landman. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of crazy. And I said, how come no one from the Towers is involved? He's like, well, they're all supposedly making money and they're leaseholders. But he said, do you want to talk to some people? And I said, sure. When he said, well, would like tonight be okay? And I said, sure, I guess it'll be fine. Matt Walker with Clean Air Council, who now technically is my boss, and Nadia Steins with Earthworks were in town, and they came to my house. And so I just told him everything we were seeing. But like, not just me, like entire neighborhoods were seeing, right? This wasn't just like one person seeing this kind of stuff. This is entire neighborhoods. They said to me, hey, would you want to testify at the EPA hearings? And I said, yeah, when? And they said, tomorrow. And I said, well, I've got to get a sitter. But yeah, I'll do it, because they were in Pittsburgh, so it was close. I didn't have to go to D.C. So I went there and I testified. And I remember there was an old friend of mine that actually did my photos years ago when I modeled, and he was actually there photographing everything. And so I had this commonality with him right away. And when you testify, you go up 2 at a time and you speak one person then the other person, and there's a room full of people waiting to testify, and then a panel of the people that were listening from the EPA, and they're all kind of looking at their phones and listening but not really listening, you could sort of tell. And then I went up and I said to the other person that I was with, I want to go last. And she said, okay. And I really didn't have anything prepared. I just told what I saw, and I can still see them visually sitting up and stopping. And I was like, and this is 40 minutes from here, and y'all don't even know what's happening. And I said, I can bring busloads of people in here. And they were just shocked. And then I got mobbed by the press and the radio, and I was like, whoa. And it just really like, the cliche of the rest is history, and now I do this work. But if you would have asked me 10 years ago if I'd be doing this, I would have sort of said, like, why? And not because I wasn't conscious of, the environment or my children or whatever, but why? I mean, I'm an artist, I'm a dancer. There's a joke, like, I can count to 8, 5, 6, 7, 8, but that's true. But the point is that, again, if I can do this work and figure things out, like, anybody can do it and figure it out. But so now I'm on staff with the council. I have been 3 years in January, but I subcontracted for numerous organizations, local ones or national organizations, and I volunteered for people, and it's just all this networking of you meet people and then they want to hear your stories. Well, really just what was going on here. I mean, there was endless truck traffic. Endless truck traffic. There still is. It's not as bad right now, but it depends on what's happening in the process of if they're building a well pad, if they're fracking it, where they are and all of this. And then I just started to see things happen with my children. My oldest son, when he was 10, 11, would have been about right, he had a rash all over him, even on his ears. And it was like a bumpy rash. It wasn't red, but it was everywhere. It didn't itch, it didn't do anything. But it was everywhere. I mean, it was on his toes. It covered his entire body. And this was like at the onset when stuff was sort of starting to happen and they were flaring, and you would see like trees would look like they were on fire. And I thought, that's really weird. And I took him to the dermatologist, who at the time was a good friend and like literally lived over the hill. And so she knew me, and she's like, I'm going to do a biopsy on this. And she did. And so she got the biopsy back, and it said it was raised hair follicles. And she's like, I know that's not it. But they could never really say what, quote, it was. One summer, we had like a really dry summer, so it wasn't uncommon to see a couple like brush fires and things. Well, I stepped off of my porch here to the right, and there's a ridge over here, and it's a few miles away, and I was like, oh my God, the entire ridge is on fire. And it was really like whoosh, like that's how and you always hear people say like a jet engine, but it's really like it was. And like if you've ever been around like a forest fire, like it does sound like that. It's just like whoosh. But it was like 2 miles away. And I mean, and I could see the flames. They were, I'm a very bad judge of height and things, but they were feet high and they were jumping in the air. And then I stood there and I was like, it's not moving. And then they were burning off holding ponds at that time. And then what really did it for me was my dad called me, and I grew up along the Monongahela River, and he said, This is when my mother was still alive even, and he said, Lois, like, I don't know what's going on, but there's trucks that are lined up on the riverbank all day long, every day, dropping hoses in the river. He's like, I mean, 15, 20 trucks all day long on the riverbank. So I said, okay. And, I know the township commissioner, like he was my school teacher. I call him like, hey, Paul, and he doesn't even know what's happening. So I make a trip to my parents about 20 minutes away, and I see all these trucks with hoses just dumped in the river. Like, it just dropped in the river. But this happened up and down all the rivers and all the creeks here. No one understands this, but it did. I just went up to one of the drivers and I said, hey, what are you doing? And he was like, oh, we're not putting anything in the river. I said, well, you can't really take out of it. And I prefaced it with like, I know you're just doing your job, however. And so then the answer to that was they hung up a sign that said, unless you have a permit, you can't be here. So the townships were permitting this. And the boroughs were permitting it. And even one time, because I was up at all these crazy hours taking kids to the buses, and then when my oldest son started to work at a restaurant, like sometimes I was picking him up at midnight, even on a school night. So I would see a lot of things that mostly when people were still sleeping, frankly, didn't see. That's when I discovered the tank pad up the road here that's still there. It's 2-3 million gallon impoundments. That one has frack water in it and fresh water. Initially it was just fresh water, and it's changed throughout the years. And then one time I was taking the kids to the bus, and I saw a frack truck backed up to a fire hydrant right down the road at the bottom of the hill here. And I was like, what in the heck is this? And I literally called 911. And she goes, oh, they worked something out with your municipality. Like, so our municipalities were selling water, fracking industries. But the Monongahela River, where we get our water from, so if you know anything about a river, and I don't know much, but I know a little bit, but like in the summer when it's dry, like, the people that are controlling the river, they have to add more water to it for like pollution and things like that. And so then they wouldn't add more water to it because they sold to the fracking companies, and then they upped our bill. So it's like hilarious. But so this is just the kind of sort of chaos. And again, like the army of ants going everywhere and making everyone crazy and just see money. It's like when you give an ant sugar, they go bananas. That's kind of what everyone was doing. And so you just had all of this happening. And then there was like a correlation that the more I learned, I was like, oh, that's why that happened. Oh, that's why that happened. Like my daughter, when she was younger, when you're still bathing your child, but backing up, my sister was here. She's from Columbus, and she knows like I'm a clean freak. And she goes, why are your toilets dirty? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I can't get them clean. She goes, did you pour bleach in them? And I was like, yes. And I've done all this stuff, but there was like this brown weirdness to our water and toilets that you could see that made like a stain that no matter what you did, it didn't come clean. Well, that's when our water was changing. And then to bathing my daughter, had I not bathed her, I would have thought that someone scalded her. So that's when our water was changing. And we have public water, we don't have well water. So that's how much was being dumped in rivers and creeks and streams that we were using. And then our public water, we still have notices every quarter that say we're above total trihalomethanes. And, so if you know anything about like public notices, like if it's at 100, it could be 9999999 for 6 months, but then as soon as it goes over, oh, we're above it. So you've really been above it for however long, and then they have to report it when it reaches this number, right? So that's a really long time. Like we've lived here 18 years, and we still have this every quarter. I hate air conditioning, but so like I was always that person where everyone was sweating. I was like, open the windows, turn on the fans. And so we're completely surrounded or encompassed by well pads and compressor stations and pipelines. And my third son had probably the worst impacts ever. I couldn't keep the windows open anymore because he would get nosebleeds in the middle of the night, and then he'd have a couple through the day where he would turn like anemic looking and pale and clots coming out of his mouth. He had a couple at school and was like, don't tell my mother. So it was just those type of things that then you would start to correlate. Oh, there's a new well pad over there. Oh, there's 3 over here. There's the compressor station down the road. Oh, there's the one we can see out of our bedroom window. And there's my neighbors, and then, and my kid's nose is bleeding everywhere, like nonstop. My daughter's issues and my other son, like, sometimes you go and you have a baby and you think it's dry, they have a little nosebleed or something like that. Well, these weren't like little nosebleeds. My kids are always outside. We live on 12 and a half acres, and so my kids are outside, especially when they were little. I'd be like, go run around a tree. And my third son again, he'd be like, Mom, my leg's swollen again. And I was like, what? And like when we were at Med Express every summer with like his legs swollen about up to his knee, 1 or 2 of them both, and They were really bullseye rashes. I'm not sure what they were from. All of my kids have had Lyme's disease, which, you can't blame everything on oil and gas. The warming of the planet exacerbates ticks, and we have this crazy tick population now. My first son was actually really ill with it because we didn't know we had it, and it mimicked a lot of viruses, and then he'd had it for a number of weeks. Like, he was really sick. My third son almost died from it because he got cellulitis on top of it from the tick bite. He had a temperature of 105 for like 4 days. They thought he had a rapidly growing tumor in his neck because his neck swelled out to here within 2 days. Yeah, like a lot of things that, it all correlates when you look back. And so that's really what I spoke on. And then plus just what we see, and, endless truck traffic, just, and it's hauling brine, and then they want to spread brine on the roads, which is radioactive, and, the roads are right here, and sprays into your yard, and, then they'd have fish kills, and they'd say it was some bizarre algae, when meanwhile, you saw the frack truck dumping in it, those kind of things. They're not allowed to have open pit impoundments anymore, but some of the well pads still do, but they're above ground, as the locals call them, swimming pools, so that's all evaporating into the air too, fracking fluid or the condensate tanks. If you've ever seen a FLIR camera that shows the invisible pollution that you hit on any well pad or pipeline or compressor station, it shows what you can't see that's coming out all the time. And as we all know, children they consume more than adults. And my kids are always in the dirt, even my daughter, so their hands are in their mouths, and they eat more, they drink more, so they obviously have more health impacts than adults do. But then as they grew, I don't want to say they got used to things, but that's sort of what it seems. They didn't seem to have as many health impacts as they grew. Even down to, I've read studies that, children have attention deficit issues, living around oil and gas and things like that. And I would probably say that a few of mine definitely did. But was it oil and gas? I don't know. Or their personalities, because I have pretty rambunctious kids. So, and little artists tend to be that way. Just a lot of things. And again, back to the correlation of, oh, that's why that happened. Again, the lies they tell you. Like, they would say, oh, those chemicals we use, it's just like your laundry detergent. Well, okay, laundry detergent is poisonous. So, and it's 3 million gallons of it. Like, it takes 3 million gallons of water to frack a well. One. Our shale is harder, so it takes more water. They say 1 million, but it's 3 million here. And it's different areas and what you're fracking for, whether it's Marcellus or Utica, because that's next, and, what region you're in, basically. So, or they would say, I'll drink that. And they still try to pull old lies of, like, you'll see an open pit impoundment or an above ground impoundment, the swimming pool, and like I have photos of one leaking everywhere, and they're like, oh, that's just fresh water, and you see brine trucks lined right up to it with hoses dropped in it. And then they say, oh, I can just walk across it. I was like, what's a few million gallons if you can just walk across it? Like, the same sort of lies that industry tells people. But, if you don't know enough about it, you tend to believe that or whatever. And what they do is, I call it the spraying of the grass. So whatever they do, they say, oh, we fixed it. Well, they come down and they spray grass seed everywhere. And so it's green, or throw wildflowers on it. Okay. I mean, if that's giving someone their land back that they can't farm anymore, and you've made a wetland on it, and there's boulders like this big that no one can even drive on, but you've sprayed grass on it. Like, okay. I mean, I guess, right? So yeah, I call it the spray grass theory.